Yep,
Thank,
that's good. Can hear you, Bob.
thank you, Shane. And if you can turn your camera off when you're uh, not speaking anyway, that would be good. Thanks.
I can hear you, Bob.
Thank you. Uh, as I say, welcome to the meeting. We're today at the JMR room in Dean House for this month's meeting. Just a reminder, the agenda pack with papers is available via the ModGov system or directly from the council website from the link that was sent out to members. Just a note that the report and appendices for agenda item 6, the General Fund Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, month 5, was published late, so is as a supplement number 1 to our reports. Reminder, when I invite someone to speak, can you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anyone who is listening to the meeting, so that I can identify both who is speaking and ensure, for those of you who are in the room, that you use the microphone so that you can be heard online. And just a reminder that this meeting is recorded in audio. Finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, can I request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. I'm also advised I've not been told there's any planned fire drill, so if alarms go off, then they are for real, and officers will show us where we need to congregate safely outside the building. And just a reminder again for those in the room, if you've got your mobile phones, if you can, or devices, if you can make sure they're turned to silent or turned off, that would be appreciated. So if we move to item 1 on our agenda, which is apologies for absence, Ms. Jackson, do we have any, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. We've received apologies from Councillor Ham, for whom Councillor Chilcott is substituting, although Councillor Ham is online. We've also received apologies from Councillor Seeb, for whom Councillor Coles is substituting, and also apologies from Councillor Cottle. Councillor Collins from the committee is online, Chair. Yes, thank you.
Oh, and I think our members have just arrived through the door as well, so we're up to full complement, I think, now. Okay, members, if we move on then to item 2 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations over and above the normal local government membership of other councils that members need to make? I'm not seeing any, so thank you. Item 3 on our agenda is minutes from the previous meeting, which are on pages 11 to 17. Are there any amendments to those minutes? And if not, could I have a proposer that I can sign them as a true and accurate record of the meeting for anyone who was actually present at that meeting? Councillor Chilcott, that you're happy to propose? Thank you. Is that seconded? Yep, Councillor Coles, thank you. And all those in favour that I sign, please show. That's clearly carried. Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is public question time. I've not been advised that we have any public questions today. So that takes us on to item 5, which is our forward plan. And Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Members will see in the committee's forward work programme that the next meeting is on Monday, the 25th of November in this very room. Excuse me. A very full agenda for that meeting scheduled at the moment. So it would have to be something quite pressing, I think, to be added to that agenda. Although I would say that beyond that meeting, fleshing out the work programme is something that yourself, the Vice Chair, and myself need to get together to look at doing that sort of post Christmas and the New Year. But very happy to take any suggestions. Members have a copy of the Executive Forward Work Programme as part of the agenda for any suggestions they may have.
Any particular suggestions at the moment? If not, if members advise myself and the Vice Chair and Mr. Jackson outside the meeting, we will, as you've heard, the next meeting itself is pretty busy, but after that we can then be looking to schedule in a series of items to come forward. So please do, if you have suggestions, drop us a line and we will endeavour to make sure we can build those into the programme. If there's no further comments on the forward plan, excellent. That takes us on to item number 6, which is the General Fund Revenue Budget Monitoring Report, month 5, which is supplement 1 on your papers in ModGov. And Ms. Hicks, I think you're going to introduce this for us.
Apologies for that. Just had to get a working microphone. Thank you, Chair. So this is the month 5 revenue budget monitoring report. You'll note that this is a slightly different report than what we produce for our quarterly reports, which has more information, and that'll be the month 6 report that you will receive at your next meeting, in terms of additional appendices around debt collection, savings, and all those additional ones that come in the quarterly report. You'll see on the front page under section 2 and 3, it talks about the movement in terms of the forecast. So it is very much a forecast because we need these figures at this stage still need to come to fruition. But at the moment, it's a forecasting a £5.324 million overspend. This is a decrease to 3.127 million on the previous month forecast. The reasons for the change, main movements for the change are detailed in section 3. So at the moment, adults are forecasting an improved position in terms of learning disabilities of 1.159 million. Leisure sports centre budget, which is under cultural services, has identified 1.2 million, which won't be fully utilised, so that can be put forward. And then the vacancies have been identified within the workforce budget under strategy, workforce and locality. You'll know we mentioned last month that they were predicting an overspend there, and they were looking to mitigate it within with other areas of their budget. So they've been now able to identify that. And there's some other finance and transactions, which is also means that that's a positive movement. However, in terms of negative movement, we are seeing a further forecast overspend in children's families and education, which has increased by 1.12 million. The main driver being the increased number of children that are in high cost residential and unregistered placements. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Just in terms of as we move down through the report, you'll see that there's an increase in the number of recommendations in the report. So we've included recommendations around picking out the savings progress, because we know it's fundamental that these are really tracked really carefully, and that information on savings will be included in each of the monthly reports now, not just the quarterly reports. We've also picked out the overspend on GSG, and the need for this authority to take continued action to avoid section 114. Just in terms of the main body of the report, section 11 of the report is a new addition in terms of in the summary of the report to include a section on DSG. Members will be aware there's a statutory override in place at the moment, that if that were to come out and we have to bring that DSG deficit onto our accounts, that would have a significant impact on us and the reserves that the council has. So we thought it would be prudent to start including it in the summary of the report, so that it was really brought to members and anyone reading the report's attention, rather than it just being included in the appendix. You'll see there around section 12 talks also about mitigation. So that's further work that's underway at the moment to try and mitigate any overspends that are in place. And section 13 again is more of a section around the savings and the delivery of those. So the main thing to focus on there, of the savings, you'll see there 75% is forecast on track to be delivered. We really need those to come to fruition. If they don't, that will have a significant impact on this year's budget and therefore next year's budget if they have to be carried forward. So that's where we're working really closely with the services to try and move those into being achieved, especially as we're now heading towards the later part of the financial year, that we really need to shift some of those. And that's where the finance business partners are working closely with the services to be able to identify what we can move across. Just in terms of page 10, you'll see there, just in terms of a graphic, in terms of that, where it talks about those that are achieved, on track, at risk and unachievable. I think the majority of unachievable does relate to children and family services, which they're forecasting are a significant value there. It is at risk. What we are doing is we have set up a children's, or changed one of the boards that we had in place to a children's finance recovery board now, which will be overseeing the mitigation plan in terms of working with the service around how we mitigate any further increase in deficit decline in this financial year and how that feeds into next year's budget. So we're working very closely with that, and there's lots of action being taken, I would say, in terms of next steps there to work closely with the service. You'll also see there in the report, it talks about some other savings that are at risk where we're really working closely with the services to try and mitigate those, asking the services to identify if you can't achieve that one saving, how are you then going to find another saving to replace it, rather than just saying it's not going to be achieved because obviously of the impact on next year's budget if we do that. And then just the appendices that contain more information there. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Members, any comments or questions? Yeah, Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I just have a couple really for kick-off. So at the moment we're seeing the overspend in children's services. Adults is pretty much on budget. Can I just sense check that you think those budgets are both quite correct when you look at where we're at in the year at the moment?
In terms of the children's budget, I think that's where we need to look. The part of the Finance Recovery Board is looking at, is it the budget that's incorrect, or is it the demand that's going through there, and can it be mitigated at all? I don't know, Maria's got a hand up, so I know she's working very closely with them if she wants to save me on this question.
Christopher, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. What we're seeing in children's social care is, in terms of their placements, we're seeing an increase month on month of about just over £1 million in terms of costs coming through. The forecasts are flatlined. So they're flatlined in terms of no additional placements coming in for the remainder of the year and no placements dropping out. So what we're seeing is every month, if they receive additional placements, they're being included in terms of the forecast. If the forecast was to continue to rise at its current rate, we'll be looking at 14 million forecast overspend. So what we need to do within the mitigations that have been identified in children's service is do more work in terms of bringing in in-house foster carers, more placements to be going to the independent foster carers, because there are some placements in terms of residential care that can be stepped down and moved into different placements because they've been stepped down, and in turn there is a step down cost that will be seen. So there are a number of actions that children's social care are taking. I would say that the budget is appropriate, but we need to take action to ensure that the budget, in terms of the forecast outturn, comes within the budget here. The additional risk that we have with any forecast overspend is how many of these forecast overspends are ongoing and how many of them are one-off just for 24-25, and any ongoing forecast overspends will have an impact on the budget and gap for 2025-26. So I want to see ongoing mitigations identified by all that have any forecast overspends. In terms of your question, this is for children's service as well.
Thank you. So most of the challenges aren't new. Most of the challenges we're talking about we saw last year and the year before. So I'm trying to understand what's happening that's different this year when compared to last year and those same challenges. So you've given us a bit of that, but at the moment that doesn't seem to be following through when you look at the budget spend.
Christopher.
I agree with you. So that's why we're changing one of the children's transformation finance boards into a children's recovery board, finance recovery board, because we need to focus on the recovery actions that are being taken both short term, medium term, and feeding the transformation programme in terms of the impact that those actions are having through the transformation as well, but that there needs to be some additional action taken in year to really hold those placements. There's also some longer term planning in terms of foster care. Internal foster carers take some time to bring on board, and I understand the service have improved the process there in terms of bringing foster carers on board. But there is a challenge. It's a national challenge around children's placements. But there are a list of mitigations which I expect to see in the Q2 report from each service that is forecast an overspend. So we have those transparently there, and we can indeed track them as we do with savings delivery.
Thank you very much. I'm just making the point really, these aren't new challenges, they're ongoing. So it becomes ever more difficult to do something with them. My next question really is around that, follows on then to children's budgets under pressure, and then that follows on to the children and family savings proposals. So it's nice to see a coloured table. We've got table 2 in the paper, so that was nice to see and very clearly laid out. But again, probably same comment as last month, in that we've got over 4 million at risk. And again, I'm not totally clear, given your last conversation, whether what you covered there is also looking at these at-risk savings.
Christophe? Yeah, please come in.
It's all wrapped up in one. You're absolutely right. So the at-risk and the savings that are in the at-risk column and the unachievable are already impacting on the forecast overspend. So any movement for those savings to be delivered will bring down that forecast overspend number. So we are tracking all of these things to ensure that they are delivered. But of course, what I'm reliant on are the actions that the service is taking to bring this to fruition. I will be holding everyone to account and tracking their delivery, but we need to see the actions and then track the individual incremental amounts that come through as we go through the year. Equally, if any of the greens are not delivered, then they will have a negative impact on the forecast overspend and will increase the forecast overspend. If it was to stay as at numbers today, it would increase it, and that goes for across the council. Any improvements in the amber or red savings will decrease the forecast overspend, or indeed increase the underspend. Any of the greens that aren't delivered, and we've got 29 million of green savings moving in the other way into non-delivery, then that will increase the forecast overspend. So we have to stay on top of all of the savings delivery.
Thank you, Chair, for your forbearance. I've got another question, but I'm just going to see if others pick it up before I ask it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things, really. The first one is on page 3, on the executive summary, on number 2. I was just a bit confused by the wording, and perhaps I'm just too basic to understand what this means, but I don't think I am. So I've read it as there's a revenue overspend of 5.3 million. And then it says, but there's £6 million we can dip into. So actually we're underspending by 0.7. So the way I see it in my finances, if I've got a tenner and I spend 11 quid, I haven't got an underspend, I've actually got an overspend. So I just feel like the wording is just not quite true when you read it black and white. Perhaps I'm just being too basic though, but I reckon there'll be a lot of people like me who would read that and think the same thing. So maybe some clarity.
Yeah, please come in.
So what we've tried to do here is separate the service forecast overspend from the overall impact to the council's bottom line. So the overall impact to the council's bottom line is that we're underspending, or we're forecasting to underspend by 736,000. But what we don't want to lose is that we're having to release 6 million contingency that's there to pick up unforeseen things in order to get there, because service directorate's forecast overspends are indeed 5.324 million. So in your analogy of £10, you can be spending £10, but if the overall organisation is holding another £2, then when you're spending 11, it looks like you're underspending by 1. So we want to draw the attention to the fact that contingency is one-off, that's 6 million in the budget. It is there to help us smooth the in-year position for sure, but actually we want to see service directorates coming on balance. So that 5.234 million forecast overspend is what we need to be targeting on an ongoing basis to be balanced. Does that help?
Thank you very much, Maria. Yeah, that helps hugely. And so my other point I wanted to raise was really following on Mandy's points, really around children's services, because I think this is clearly one of the biggest pressures that this council has. At the last exec, I also raised concern around children's services and what we were doing around that. I've heard what the finance officers had to say, and a lot of what I've heard today is similar to what we heard at the exec last time, which was about tracking, about keeping on top of it. But I'm not filled with huge enthusiasm about the way forward, but I appreciate this may take some time to get there. Because what I'm seeing in the papers is that we're failing to get children's spending under control this year. We're potentially putting £4 million of savings at risk on the children's element for next year. Ofsted found earlier on in the year that Somerset children were at risk of significant harm from youth violence. This is really concerning. So when I read this, I'm not just thinking about the numbers on the paper, I'm thinking about the knock-on effect that means to people's in their real everyday today lives. And the impression that I get, and I hate to feel this, but this is absolutely the impression I get, is that we are failing our children. Are we not? I feel like we need more urgency, and it's not just about tracking and trying to do that sort of stuff, but there's so much more to it. I just feel like the urgency perhaps isn't there. Perhaps I'm not being kind enough, really, but that's just how I feel.
Councillor Shearer.
Hi, thank you, Councillor Rodriguez, for bringing that point forward. I did just want to say, I absolutely, from working with Maria now only for a couple of months, and certainly our service for coming on for 10 months, I think we absolutely understand the urgency. There are systemic issues across Somerset completely, and I'm not saying they're not ours in the Somerset Council, but I'm blessed being able to be I'm also the chair of the Safer Somerset Partnership. So I was very knee deep into that JTI, which is the Joint Target Area Inspection that you're referring to, where as far as serious youth violence is concerned, yes, everybody, every public authority really in Somerset has quite a few places to look at very closely. I'm thinking that's the police, health, probation, our own children's services, and youth justice, where individually we all do particularly well, particularly when a child is in crisis and is at risk of serious youth violence, but we're not brilliant at speaking to each other. So that is absolutely, and that's something that we have to do regardless of, I mean, the budget is one thing, and forgive me for saying that, Maria, I'm not parking it like it's not important, but I think that delivery of key children's services and protection services is really important to all of us. So I'm always grateful every time you bring it up, because the work on the JTI and to put it right going forward is super important for everybody, and it's our children at the end of the day. So I just want to give a bit of assurance that, you know, we're still in rooms talking to our colleagues across the piece about that. It is really important, but we have to, a bit like trying to manage some of our some of the all of the areas of overspend and non-delivery, if you like, within children's services. We have to make sure we're not always reacting to crises. We're getting ahead of the game and ensuring that what we're delivering is delivering the right things to keep children out of care, keep children out of harm, keep children in schools. But no one team does that. We have to do that with all of our partners. So I just want to share that, but I'm really grateful to you for raising it.
Thank you. If I might actually, while you're holding the mic, just a question for you, Councillor Shearer, as well, because obviously we're talking about how we're managing the budgets and how we're looking at that. Just wanted to take you to page 23, and it's talking about the unregistered placements in particular. I mean, we can manage budgets, but from reading the report, it sounds like we've got a real issue in terms of the number of children who are coming in and their needs. We have a target of unregistered of 1 placement, which doesn't seem like it's going to be even achievable. The month 3 projection is 4, which is still below where we are, and the trend line looks like it's heading upwards from that. So however much we manage the finances, if that demand is coming through, how do we deal with that? Because that looks like that's a train coming towards us, and I'm not sure there's anything in here that's heading that off at the pass.
No, and that's what keeps us awake at night. That's absolutely right. I mean, some of the issues around it ties in with Councillor Rodriguez's point, which is that when children come into our care, they can come in from nowhere, and they can come in from, you know, our trying to keep them out of care for as long as possible. If we do have somebody a child who comes in, or a sibling group, what you don't want is 4 or 5 who come in straight away. No offense, we would take them in, of course, and children, we have to look after them. But on occasions, we just do not have those residential places for them. The trick, which I'm sure is part of the mitigations and the change of work that Maria is talking about, is that when we catch them in crisis, we have to be really good at getting them back out of that crisis place. Now, if we are mandated by a court order, then that's not up to us when we move them out of a particular type of cover or type of provision. But where it's not, then yes, we need to be particularly good is our step down. Now, we do have a difficult market in Somerset, not impossible, but a difficult one, which we're trying to mitigate through Homes and Horizons, but it's slow. So yeah, I absolutely accept that. But what we need to make sure we're really good at, what I know we're working at, it's not very visible work, but we're working at to make sure that we model what is predictable, and then have our kind of our next steps for those bits that aren't, but we have to get them out of crisis. But at the moment, it's really hard to find the right kind of residential care for them.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Yes, Councillor Trimnell.
Oh, it is working. I do apologise, completely forgot. So basically, what I want to find out, there's no timeline on table 2 on page 10 for the completion for when the actions have to be taken, and we can already see that some of those are at risk. I wanted to know what the timeline was, as in when does this have to be done? Is it the end of this financial year? And additionally, what's being done to keep the at-risk heading towards the on-track direction and not into the unachievable, please?
So in terms of timeline, they all have to be delivered by the start of the next financial year. So but ideally we want it before that, because obviously we have to set next year's budget in February. So we need to really know that they have been achieved before we set that budget, because we need to see the impact, if any, on next year's budget. In terms of the ones that are at risk or unachievable, that's where we're working closely with the services to see whether they can identify any alternative saving if they're really unable to achieve that saving. And that's the work that we continue to do with them at the moment. I think it's interesting to see, it will be interesting to see the services position in terms of individual over or unders, to see if they can't identify some of the savings that they may want to put forward. Actually, can we see those patterns in underspend that is coming through in some of the services, and whether they're able to offer that up as a saving instead, where the budgets need to be perhaps haven't been aligned correctly, and we could take some of that. So that's one of the Chloe's, like the key lines of inquiry that we're looking at, is the outturn position, the effect that's had on this year's budget, to see the effect then that it may have on 25-26 when we set the budget.
Thank you. So if, say, some of the things do slip and we've got some things that you know amount to an amount that's unachievable, would that be transferred as an aim to bring down in the next financial year instead?
Yeah, so I think when we set this year's budget, we had one area where their saving from the prior year wasn't achieved. That was carried forward for them to achieve in this financial year. So depending on the achievement of it, if they really didn't feel they could achieve it, then we'd have to look at that in order to provide an alternative saving. But if they felt that they could achieve it, they just needed a little more time, then we could perhaps look to carry that forward into the budget. But obviously that will have an effect. So we need to.
Ms. Christopher, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just to supplement the answer that Nicola has given, what I would say to you is also that the expectation is that everyone delivers their savings to time, value and profile. So if some aren't delivered, as Nicola's already said, we would expect them to be delivered in the following financial year, but that will create a forecast overspend because the budget has already been removed. The budget for all these savings has been removed from the beginning of the year. So the expectation is that everyone needs to deliver them, because if they don't, they will overspend as a result at the end of the financial year. They are expected, as Nicola's already said, to find substitute savings, and we would expect them to be clear about that. But only where a saving is undeliverable for a particular reason, I don't know, there's a change in legislation and we can't deliver it, would I expect to see us having an issue with it on an ongoing basis. My expectation is that these are all robust and deliverable, and therefore that's what should be happening across the council.
And just to confirm on that, so for future reports, you would expect there to be, if there was something that can't be deliverable, we would be seeing within the report what it is that's being substituted in effect as a saving from within that section?
Yes, and I would be seeing the executive it would be within the recommendations that we are substituting X saving with Y, whether it's one-off just for this financial year to tide us over, or whether it's an ongoing substitution because something's happened to that saving and it's no longer deliverable as it was originally designed. Those should be few and far between. I wouldn't expect to see any, but then this is within the gift of the service to tell us if they're going to deliver the remaining 29 million green, which everyone says they're on track with and that should be delivered, and the 6 million, just over 6 million of red and amber savings that the organisation is telling us they're having some difficulty with. So we're saying, what do you need to unblock them? How do we get them delivered and move from amber and red into green? And if not, what's the substitute saving, whether one-off or ongoing?
Thank you. Councillor Trimnall, and I'm coming to Councillor Hobhouse and then Councillor Chilcott.
So I've one more as well. Dedicated schools grant has come up here. It's come up in agenda item 7 as well. And it's a fairly hefty issue because we're waiting basically for something to come through to enable us. My understanding is that at the moment we don't class that on our books, is that right? But that at the end of April 26, I think I noted down, that then comes onto our books, and I read that would then cause us to have to issue a section 114 notice. So what are we hoping for from the government, and what happens if that doesn't happen, which I think I know the answer to, but...
Ms. Christophe.
I'm glad that you raised the question because I was going to raise this in a supplementary bit of information following on from how Nicola presented the report. It's incredibly important for us to recognise this is a huge financial risk for us as a council, and this is a huge financial risk for a number of councils up and down the land. We're waiting for the outcome of what government will decide to do with the statutory override, which essentially tells us that we can carry the deficit on our balance sheet, but not offset it against any of our other reserves. It's kind of held, but it's not included in how we calculate certain things. The issue that we've got here in Somerset is that we have a deficit that we are carrying forward. However, we're creating almost as much of a deficit in the in-year position. So we're not seeing a position where the deficit is reducing, or indeed we're not increasing it by too much. It's a gradual increase. There's quite a sharp forecast overspend increase because we set a budget with an 18 million deficit in year, so that we can see that the need around the high needs block and with SEND is significant here at Somerset. So we don't know what the government solutions are going to be. I have flagged in the next report that's on the agenda that if government does not seek to extend the statutory override, we would be in section 114 territory because it's a significant risk for us. And we're in dialogue with MHCLG so that we can understand what the plans are around this, and lots of local authorities are raising this across the country. It's a bit of a unknown as to what they're going to do yet, but I would find it hard to believe that they wouldn't extend the statutory override, although that is a temporary sticking plaster and not an actual solution.
Well, I mean, just to add that if it's increasing, and like you say, it's a sticking plaster solution, at some point, this is like a ticking time bomb, isn't it? And at some point, that's going to go off. And I think that's the concern is what do we do? What can we do to offset that?
Through you, Chair.
Please do.
What I would say is that we first of all need to understand where we're spending the expenditure in terms of the high needs block, and is there anything that we can do to kind of stem that flow in year, so we're not increasing it at the rate that the expenditure is increasing. There are a number of different factors, and we have Councillor Shearer in the room, and if we had the officers in the room, I'm sure they would all give you chapter and verse on this subject. But from a simplistic financial perspective, if the overspend continues each year, then we're adding to the deficit. So even if government were to come up with a solution where, and this has not been said by government, but if hypothetically speaking, government were to say, all those deficits, we've got a way of removing them from you, so you don't need to carry them anymore. We would create a deficit in the following financial year because our spend is more than the budget that we're allocated. So we've got to find a way of helping this situation and staying open with government about what the next steps are going to be. It's a real issue for us, and it's a significant risk.
Thank you. Councillor Harbers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we set this budget, this committee knows I asked the officers what the cost of the LCNs were going to be. And I was told £350,000. I then received an email telling me that the wages bill on their own are £660,000. I would like to raise the subject again, because at the end of the day, I don't think we're spending far less than £1 million on the LCNs, and in our financial position, I would like to propose that they are actually taken out of the budget per term until we have enough money to run them.
Councillor Lyshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a particular figure except to say that I don't think it's anywhere near that figure for the 9 officers to cover the 18 LCNs and I believe one other salary as well. So I don't think it's that much. And a lot of, when we first looked at the first year of LCNs, as well as the money that our previous Chief Finance Officer, Jason Vaughan, put aside, 300,000 for the first year of setting them up, we also considered the posts that had come through from the district councils, where in the district councils there were officers working within the community. And so those were put together with the 300,000 for setting up for the first year, where there was a much greater reliance on a bigger number of officers, and that for the first year did make 600,000. My understanding now is that it's more like half of that for those 9 officers who cover 2 LCNs each, and I think 1 line management officer. That's my understanding. So I think the 600,000 figure came from the first year when it was putting all the district budgets together with that allocation of a further 300,000. But I'm very happy to take that away with our officers and actually check those figures for you.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because certainly the last figure that we were issued with was around about the 600,000 mark. So yeah, if you can give us an update on that, that would be very helpful. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to the LCN question. I know it's not specifically in the papers, but as has been raised, Chair, I think we all need to bear in mind that the link officers are that connection between this council, towns, parishes, all of our communities. That work has always gone on before LCNs. And if you don't have an LCN, it would still need to continue. We have got to still have dialogue with our towns and parishes, etc. So with or without LCN, to me, that work is essential in our county, and I would hope that it would continue regardless. I'll just move on to the next question then, really, and that's around climate and place. So we have a lot of dialogue about children's, but if we have a look at our climate and place budget, that's seeing an overspend of 4.295 million due to increases in the waste services contract. I asked the question because probably for our residents, climate and place encompasses most of the services that they most value. It's our highways, it's our potholes, it's our pavements, it's the sense of place. Now, I've not seen anything anywhere to look at how that's going to be mitigated, and I would really want to know that in detail because it will affect our communities, but I've heard no dialogue about that at all, and I'd welcome some. Thank you.
Ms. Hicks or Ms. Christophe, who wants to address that issue?
Sorry, I was just trying to find the section in the report, because we know it was the waste services and the additional costs on the waste contract that created the bulk of that.
Page 8.
Yeah, bulk of that overspend. If you go into the appendix, which is on page 36, isn't it? There's a detailed overview there of what's creating the overs and unders within that budget. And I think there's 3.1 million is on waste services there. So it's around, we're asking that service to look at whether there's any mitigations or underspends that can be taken from other areas of the service to then help towards that underspend for overspend for this financial year. And obviously we've built that pressure into next year's MTFP for the increase in the waste contract. So that way that one we don't expect to follow through into the next year. But I think in terms of the service, I think it's whether they can mitigate all of that overspend in waste this year or not.
Ms. Christofi?
I was just going to add that under the next report, I've made provision for the contractual cost. So maybe we can pick it up in a bit more detail there. As Nicola's already said, we're expecting service to identify any mitigations that they do have. If they can be ongoing, then we will see that come through into the budget as well. If they can't and they're just one-off for this year, whatever they can do to kind of pull back that forecast overspend is required.
Yeah.
Thank you. My concern with that is over the years, if we look at, and I'll pick highways because that's a big part of that sort of area, and waste, hugely important to the public. And I know there have been huge reductions in a lot of the works that we already do. And I just have real concerns if those were to go further. And I think we need to know about that well ahead of time. Thank you.
Ms. Christofi?
I think any areas that service directors are looking to see forecast underspends from to help manage the financial position would be detailed in any future reports. So it should be transparently there. I would also say that that's why we have the 6 million contingency to deal with one-offs if we need to bridge in the current financial year. Obviously, I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in the following report.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments from members on this report. So just I think members obviously said, I mean, we need to make sure that there's clarity within the reports that are coming through. And I think certainly there was some discussion at the last meeting, which I know is going to be built into future reports in terms of previous year's comparators to see how figures are actually comparing with where we're moving. Obviously, as has been said, there are a number of ongoing pressures through the budget this year, which are going to have to be dealt with on a fairly tight basis, because obviously we haven't got a lot of leeway, because as has been mentioned, a lot of the potential use of our contingency fund is already potentially being used currently, and again we need to be looking for this report coming forward each month to see on the delivery that is coming through on these savings, and those that aren't, how we're mitigating those, because as I say, we are on a position where we need to make sure we can't afford just to allow savings not to materialise. Ms. Christofi, you wanted to make a quick comment?
I just wanted to come in as a final thought, just to leave the committee with what we need to do is preserve our reserves as much as possible. So any negative impact of the in-year position that dips into our earmarked reserves reduces our financial resilience. We're already using a significant number of reserves and the exceptional financial support, as well as the one-off from the collection fund, to balance the 24-25 budget. So any underspend is technically not a drawdown from our reserves. So it's an important thing for us to remember. We don't want to draw down any more other than what we've already committed. In fact, we want to reduce what we've already committed where possible.
Thank you. And I've just seen on the chat that Councillor Redmond has just highlighted that his scrutiny committee are going to be taking a deep dive into the DSG funding in February. I think it says there, if I can read from across the room. But okay. And again, members, you'll see on the report the recommendations that are going to be made to the executive for them to follow through when this report moves on to them. So if members are happy to move on, we will move to the next item, which is agenda item 7, which is the medium-term financial strategy. And straight back to Ms. Christofi to introduce this one, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. This report has already been through the executive at the beginning of the month, but I will just take members through it and take questions at the end. So the medium-term financial strategy and plan was set as part of the February budget. It was also reported in April, and there were no changes made to the medium-term financial plan at that stage. Here you will see a report with an appendix that is reviewing the assumptions that were made in the medium-term financial plan and strategy, and also it's extending the medium-term financial plan for an additional year, the year 2029-30. So we have a 5-year medium-term financial plan to accompany our medium-term financial strategy. There are a number of areas that we've needed to look at following on from the financial emergency that was declared in November 2023. And as you well know, the budget was set in February, as I've just said. You will see this in paragraph 9 on page 21, right at the top. The budget was set using a significant number of one-off resources, both general use of earmarked reserves of just under 37 million and exceptional financial support, a capitalisation directive of just under 37 million as well. And in addition to that, we also had some one-offs from the collection fund that were included, which I think is just under 8 million. Those one-offs mean that the budget that was set, while it was balanced, creates a financial sustainability challenge for us in that the gap is only dealt with for 1 year, and we need to find sustainable savings in future years to enable us to balance in a sustainable way. As part of this, there were 6 key objectives of the medium-term financial strategy that are listed in paragraph 12. And I will just take members on to where we are at the moment. There are a number of different challenges that we're facing, not just local challenges, but also some of these are national challenges. So adult social care pressures, children's social care pressures. There are homelessness challenges as well. Obviously, our SEND and high needs block DSG challenge that we have in terms of the deficit within the DSG. But this all follows on from 13 years of austerity for local government. We're also seeing that 1-year settlements that local government has received have been incredibly challenging. They're received very late in the financial year, normally just before Christmas in terms of the provisional settlement. It makes it very difficult to plan for a future financial year. So all of these challenges combined create a lot of uncertainty, as well as the uncertainty that we've had and the challenges regarding inflation. So while inflation has now dropped down to 1.7% as was reported in September, actually we've still got that high inflation built into the base costs that we're seeing come through. Interest rates are still high, around 5%. Therefore, there are some significant challenges there. The budget gap scenario in table 1 on top of page 23 was the scenario as set in the February budget. It has a budget gap of £104 million. These are the assumptions that have been revisited. So in order to revisit the assumptions, we've looked at a variety of different scenarios. There are actually infinite scenarios around the medium-term financial strategy and plan, but what I've done here is I've homed to 3 scenarios: a low scenario, a central scenario, and a high scenario. It could be even better than the low scenario. It could be even more challenging and worse than the higher scenario. Lower is a better view of lower inflation environment and the council's ability to manage its pressures to a minor level is successful. Central is what I would call a realistic, somewhere in the middle in terms of inflation, coupled with still the challenging but prudent view on our abilities as a council to contain and reduce demand pressures. And high is a worse view on inflation, coupled with a more pessimistic view regarding the council's ability to manage demand and other pressures. So these 3 scenarios for 25-26, we've taken the central scenario forward, which revises the gap of £104 million by a net movement of 15 million reduction to just under £89 million gap. Now, the changes in the central scenario are reported in Table 3 on the top of page 24. And also the residual amounts that have been made that we leave as provisions in the medium-term financial plan are included in Appendix A in the report so that you can see. So let me start from the first one. So inflation non-contractual. This is inflation provision that was included within the medium-term financial plan, but it's not contractual. So there are some work required to pull back what we would allocate out for non-contractual inflation to any of our expenditure contracts. I've pulled back an expectation that 16 million can be taken off this provision, relieving a provision of just over £9 million. Recognising that national living wage is still to be announced and any other changes that the new government may have that may affect some of our contracts, although we may not have within the contracts a built-in level of expected contractual inflation. Inflation contractual, this is as per the contractual obligations that I am aware of within the budget. So we have a provision that already existed in the budget and I'm increasing it by 7 million. This is in direct response to the waste contract. So I'm making the provision here, not only for the in-year cost that you can see, but also the cost that I know will be coming through according to the contract in 2025-26 and 2026-27. Again, this is a provision that I'm making available within the medium-term financial plan. That's not to say if there are any opportunities to hold some of this back through other mitigations, we'll have to revisit when we're setting the budget in February to see. But essentially that 7 million, that 2.2 million in those 2 years, take the provision that's in the medium-term financial plan to 9.9 million in 2025-26 and 6 million in 26-27. And then we've got about £4 million in each of the remaining years. I've rolled on the fifth year in the MTFS with 4 million for this and for non-contractual inflation. Pay inflation, there's no change in assumptions here, which is why you see nothing in the table for Table 3. But if you flip back to the Appendix A, you will see that there's about £6.1 million in each of the first 4 years. I haven't made a provision for the 5th year at this stage, but for each of the first 4 years, it's about a 2% approximation of pay that we're making provision here, but obviously as things change, we'll understand. We don't know what the national pay agreement will be in any one of these future years, so we'll have to adjust accordingly and following on from the announcement in the current financial year. In terms of demographic and demand, this is to reflect the potential demand, future demand that may happen in these services. So if you think about the demand that we're talking about in adult social care and children's social care in particular, as our demand-led services, I've stripped out some of the provision in each of the years, as you can see, because there's the modelling that was undertaken, I think is about a year old in adults and a bit older in children's, but I'm expecting the modelling to be updated and projected forward to the end of March 2026. And my expectation is that we're taking action following a demand management approach where prevention and demand management are actually having an impact on preventing the demand coming through the door in the first place. Not once the demand's in, stepping it down. The expectation is that we're able to find a way of preventing that demand coming through. That leaves us with just over £8 million in 2025-26, just over £7.5 million in 26-27, and just under £6 million in 27-28, and about £5 million in the last 2 years. Each of these assumptions will be revisited twice a year publicly, so we'll be reviewing them. I'm also expecting other pressures. I've made an assumption where we kind of push the organisation to find ongoing mitigations for some of these pressures that have been identified in future years. So I've taken £1 million off, I've taken some of the other numbers off, but I've also included some because there will be pressures that come through that we're not sure about. So I want to make the provision in future years and then revisit it as we go through. In terms of previously agreed savings, there's an expectation that all savings are delivered that have been agreed. So as Nicola said in the previous report, and as I have said, they are expected to be delivered in full, to time and profile in terms of their value as well. So you'll see from Appendix A, there is a £10 million saving expectation in 25-26, and this is predicated on all of the savings in the current financial year being delivered. There is no provision here for a reversal out of a saving that's not deliverable. Roll forward pressures, this is a new line. So I've separated this line out from the demand and demographic to pick up any in-year pressures that we're seeing in any areas of demand and other pressures where they're not being contained in the current financial year, making a provision for them in a future year. Now, I would expect us to pull this down as low as possible and not to need to utilise it to its full extent. But I have made an assumption that there will be some, because I can see that we have some significant pressures in year that may not be able to be managed in full. Children's social care placements is just one of the ones that we've been talking about. Capital financing, I haven't taken a view on reducing anything to do with the capital programme, but what I have taken a view on is the expenditure profile to date. And I believe here that we have the opportunity to reprofile the capital programme just based on current delivery projections. It's not happening at its ambitious budget that it currently has. So I've reprofiled it over my assumption is that the capital financing will be reprofiled over 3 years to push back some of the programme so that the budget matches the actual project delivery timescales. And therefore, while I'm not taking out the 6 million, I'm just making the provision for it later on. In terms of adult social care precept, I've left the estimate of 2% in for 2025-26 only. Members might wonder why I've left it in for 2025-26 and not removed it for all years or left it in for all years. At this stage, we haven't had any announcement from government about the adult social care precept. So I've removed it from all future years, but I would find it hard to believe that they wouldn't be including something in for 25-26. So I've left the provision in for 25-26. Now, if they decide to enable us to have a 3% increase in adult social care precept, there will be an additional benefit. If they decide that we're not allowed to increase our adult social care precept, then there will be an amount that comes through to reverse that out, which will bring the pressure into the budget. The general council tax increase, while no decisions on, I should stress, no decisions on adult social care precept or council tax have been taken, and they won't be taken until February. But what I've done with the medium-term financial plan is modelled what I would see as continuing on from the work the previous Section 151 officer did in estimating a 2.99% increase for the first 4 years. And I've left the last year with no council tax increase. There's also an assumed increase in the tax base growth of about 1% that we'll be monitoring to see whether that will come to fruition. What I'd like to take members to before I move on is Table 6, analysis of the saving themes in the medium-term financial strategy. There are a number of saving themes that we have. There's a more detailed list that exists as well in the public domain as part of the April report. I've just taken a summary of that list here with the lower end range and the upper end range. We are working incredibly hard as an organisation to identify individual savings proposals within these themes that will enable us to bridge the budget gap in a sustainable way. In Table 7, there is a forecast of what our earmark reserves position will be, as well as the general fund reserve there, so you can see both. We have, like I said, taken a general use of earmark reserves of 37 million into the budget in budget setting for 2024-25. You'll see here that the forecast to be spent from reserves is 49 million. There are other earmark reserves that have been held for specific purposes that services are spending according to the criteria that were set around them. Again, this is a forecast. I will monitor this as we go through the year. It excludes reserves held for accountable bodies, schools balances, HRA, housing revenue account, and of course the dedicated schools grant. And the other thing that I would take members to are there are a number of significant financial risks. I've mentioned the one-offs in terms of funding, and this is consistent with the Section 25 statement from the previous Section 151 officer in February. We need to ensure that we have sustainable financial position identified, and that the impact of any removal of the statutory override on the DSG would send us into a Section 114 territory. For members, if you take a look at the Appendix A, you will see the capitalisation directive of 36.884 million as a positive number, and also the change in use of reserves of 38.8 million. These are the reversals of the one-off, which is why they're increasing the gap and they're not reducing that. So I want to draw members' attention to that, because quite often the other amounts are a lot smaller. It's the fact that we have balanced the budget using two significant one-offs that have impacted the budget gap. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chilcott, you were first.
Let me get back to my page very quickly. I was at the executive meeting, as Maria will know, and I raised some questions and concerns, but I will raise them here as well, being this is a scrutiny meeting. So Maria, forgive me if there's a repeat of some. So my first question is just to confirm, I think your medium assumption for inflation, i.e. the central scenario, was around 2%. Can I just confirm that that is what you said at the executive?
Yes.
Thank you. So I suppose my first concern, I suppose, is that I think 2% is probably fairly ambitious when we look at world events at the moment. And my concern is, to me, that should probably be a low assumption and not a medium one. I'll move on to the other questions I've got. So we've got there a huge shift of 15.1 million in 25-26, if you like, removed effectively from the shortfall. And if we look at the first one, inflation non-contractual, I cannot see that any of our contracts, when we're looking to renegotiate or work with them, are going to be decreasing. I think if we look at contracts over the last few years, we've seen increases as opposed to decreases. We've also got the budget coming along, which is probably going to increase employers' national insurance, which is going to affect every business that employs. So I think the 16 million is hugely ambitious. And again, the inflation contractual, the 7 million on the line below, we've got a good chunk of that already accounted for within the waste contract, which we heard about in the last paper, which for me doesn't leave a lot of leeway. I'll start with that and let you respond.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of the assumption around inflation non-contractual, this is not based on there is no contractual obligation for this amount. This is not the contractual element. So this is not negotiating with our contracts and saying we're not going to pay you what's already in your contractual terms and conditions, or the contract that we signed that's tracking CPI. It's not that. This is where we've made a provision that we may need to allocate out money for inflation that's we're not contracted to give. So having had conversations internally with various departments, I've got confidence that we can pull that back. Knowing what the government's going to do with employers NI will be key, and also what the government's going to do with national living wage and how that will track. So again, these are assumptions that we need to work hard to make come to fruition. But I do think having 25 million there was too high. Now, it may be that one assumption, it's the central one that comes to fruition, one assumption it's the lower one or the upper one, and we'll be tracking all of these every day until something crystallises and drops out as an assumption, becomes a reality, or indeed where there is work that we can place reliance on, or further information that comes to us. In terms of the inflation contractual, can I take you to Appendix A? Because I think that's where the answer to your question lies. It's 9.9 million that I've made available based on the 2.9 million that was already there. And in terms of the contracts that we knew about that we'd need to make provision for, and the additional 7 is just for the waste contracts.
Thank you. I'll carry on. I still think they're ambitious targets. Like I said, I would see those as low as opposed to medium if you ask me for a guess. The next place to go to is obviously if we don't come out as planned and we see our national insurance, we will presumably on the next paper see something under pressures, and I wasn't sure whether national insurance pressure would come within the wages and salaries pressure, because I wasn't sure where that would sit moving forwards. But this all leads me to the reserves, which we can see on page 26. Now, from memory, when we look at the reserves, if we saw the previous year, so if we look at the forecast balance as at March 24, I think from memory, the forecast balance at March 23, if we go back a year, was about 150 million. 24 was at 100 million and 25 is at 55 million. So if we look at the last 2 years spending of reserves, if we had another year that was similar, we wouldn't have any reserves. So there's been a huge pull on reserves. I suppose I'd use the phrase hemorrhaging for want of a better word, but I think if all of us at home had our savings account and over the last 2 years we'd taken a third of them out, I think I'd have a level of anxiety if this was my spending at home. So just some commentary on that would be welcome. Thank you.
Just before you come in, Councillor Lyshon indicated she wanted to come in, and I'll come to you, Ms. Christophe.
Thank you, Chair. At the review of reserves, the last 2 reviews, I found it really helpful to understand the difference between an earmarked reserve, as in an MTFP earmarked reserve, and an earmarked reserve which could be money such as government funds for town deals and money that is earmarked to be spent. So it is in effect money in and money out. I think it's really important that we understand what an earmarked reserve is. If it's earmarked for a particular expenditure, and if we didn't spend it, it would go back to government, say, and an earmarked reserve, which is where money has been put back as an MTF reserve for exactly that, for medium-term financial plan. But I'm very willing to hand over to Maria, as always. But I don't know whether when we break down the reserves in the review of reserves and the spreadsheet that comes, whether actually it might be possible to define them more carefully so that we understand which are the reserves for the medium and longer term and which are reserves to be spent in the shorter term.
Christophe?
Yes, Councillor Lation's absolutely right. So there are some reserves that are earmarked for, well, all earmarked reserves are earmarked for a specific purpose, but there are some that are ring-fenced or grant-funded that would need to be paid back if they're not used for the purpose that we've set them aside. Some are there to span multiple years as well, because the project will take time. So there is that expectation. We also have some corporately held earmarked reserves for specific purposes. So, for example, insurance fund, where we can't make an insurance provision, but we recognise it's not an insurance provision because it doesn't meet that certainty or indeed an accrual. It needs to be held as an earmarked reserve, and we would have a business risk reserve or something of the equivalent to deal with unforeseen things that happen within the year. We need to review reserves at least on an annual basis, and I will be reviewing them as part of the build up to the February budget and the Section 25 statement that I'll be writing around the robustness of the budget and the adequacy of reserves. I understand what you're saying in terms of the draw on reserves. However, The budget was set in that way quite transparently, using £39 million worth of, just under £39 million of earmarked reserves. It's why I said in the previous item, anything that we don't spend in the current financial year enables us to not draw that full amount from reserves. It might sound like we're topping up the earmarked reserves, but essentially, if we don't need to draw down all of that 39 million, that will be good for us. If we do need to draw it down, that's what we budgeted for, and that was the expectation. But there will need to be a review of all of our earmarked reserves so that as we come to the next report, we're in a position where I can give you that view.
Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I fully understand some, and I was actually wrote down self-insurance as a reserve. Obviously, we need to have there, and that must remain. But we have also got some other resilience reserves that are now at nil, and we have drawn on them previously in previous years. And from memory, when you look at the healthy organisation audits that were done right around the country, your level of reserves are absolutely key in the resilience of an organisation. So that's why I raise it. They're reducing dramatically, and it'd be fair to say that I am concerned about it and remain concerned. Thank you.
I share your concerns, and that's why we will need to do everything that we can to prevent the in-year position depleting reserves any further. That's why I stand by that statement. We have not set a budget that tops up reserves. So first of all, we need to deal with our financial management of the in-year position and stay within budget and coming underspent where possible so that we can contribute to reserves. We need to set a sustainable financial budget, and then we need to rebuild our financial resilience through our earmarked reserves. It's important that general fund balance is also preserved at the level that it's at. The previous Section 151 officer gave a view that it needed to be between a range. I think it was 30 and 60 million, and the 52 is within that. I will also be given a view as we go towards the February budget setting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Rodriguez, then Councillor Locke, and then Councillor Trimnell.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things for me quickly. A couple of weeks ago in the papers, I don't always believe what you read in the papers, but I did read that the council was potentially going to have this £130 million budget gap, which I can see where it came from the low, central and high kind of thing. And what I wanted, just for clarity, in case there are any very good news reporters watching back this video, what I noticed looking at the MTFP is that clearly you're planning on that central kind of model of the £88 million overspend, not the 130. So just for clarity, in case there are any good reporters watching back, can you just confirm that that's what you're basing kind of the next few years on, is the central position?
Ms. Christophe, thank you.
Just for clarity, there are infinite number of scenarios that can be planned for the medium-term financial plan and strategy. And what I did say was it could be even better than the lower scenario, or it could be even worse than the high scenario. So these are scenarios that we've taken across three. I've focused on the central scenario, and I've said consistently that as we work towards the assumptions and ensuring that we can make any pressures or growth that these assumptions create in the budget to be as low as possible, because we are taking actions so we don't need the provision that's been made. And equally, we are looking for additional savings to come through so that we can balance the budget in a sustainable way, not using one-offs. It's incredibly important for us to await the government's financial settlement. So once we know the spending review and the provisional financial settlement, and indeed the final settlement, we will know where our government funding is and what the permission in terms of parameters around council tax will be, and then members can take that view in February. This is a live document that is used every day, and assumptions will change as we go through. Depending on different government announcements or indeed the in-year position and its potential impact on the future. So I will be updating this behind the scenes all the time. You won't see it again publicly until February, but it changes all the time. This is the position as at October. And by the time we get into November, it will have changed.
Councillor Rodriguez.
And you led me kind of into my next question. Clearly, we're all very impatient for what the government's going to say in 2 years' time about the budget. And I just wondered, looking at kind of obviously the challenge ahead, if any modelling's been done, if the government says, look, increase your council tax however much you want, how much that would have to be in order to bridge that funding gap of the 88 million? Do we know what that is?
We can. The government's not indicated that we can do whatever we want with council tax, but it's incredibly important that whatever the 1% of council tax is, if we had a budget gap, we could divide it up and tell you exactly what that could be. At this stage, I don't think that's a useful amount of our time. I see where you're going with it, but I think it's particularly important that we watch the space and see what government's going to do. Indeed, with the provisional settlement and the financial parameters around the way that local authorities can operate. We've already seen them take some small policy decisions around the HRA and the ability to use right to buy receipts. So we need to wait to see what comes through from government. I'm hopeful, but I'm not expecting a significant amount from government, and we have to manage, as we are continuing to do so, within the financial parameters that we do have. That means that we will need to find a way of managing our pressures, however difficult they are.
Thank you. Councillor Locke.
Yeah, I apologise if it's in the paperwork in front of us, but the earmarked reserves, of the earmarked reserves total which we've got, how much of the earmarked reserves are already allocated, and how much are time allocated that have to be spent within a certain time before they are paid back to government?
Christophe.
That's a really good question. I don't know how many are time limited. However, earmarked reserves, by the very nature of the name, are all earmarked for a purpose. Whether we need to spend them is a different thing. So if they're earmarked, for example, for a business risk reserve, we would hope that we wouldn't have any business risks that exceed our contingency in year or our ability to mitigate the financial position. So we wouldn't need to dip into that reserve, albeit it is there for that purpose. So some of them we have there for the security that they're there to deal with the unforeseen things, but we hope that we never have to dip into them. Where we've seen local authorities struggle and issue Section 114 notices is where they haven't had that resilience in their earmarked reserves and nowhere to go to reprioritise the reserves if they could be to deal with the in-year position.
Thank you. Councillor Trimmel.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a question. Firstly, page 23, regarding the three premises that you're working on, low, central or high. We saw this week or in this last week that some banks have started raising their interest rates, and that could be because they are viewing inflation as likely to start going up, and we're obviously all waiting on tenterhooks for the budget to find out what is going to happen and what picture the finances nationally are going to be. But I just wondered, how does that, are you worried about that, about inflation going up and pushing us into that high level, which obviously would be hugely problematic for us? But also, it says that it's classed as the worst view on inflation, coupled with more pessimistic view regarding the council's ability to manage demand and other pressures. And it seemed to say the two had to be linked. And I wondered whether either of those in independence would push us into that high, or is there a sort of a midpoint that, do you see what I mean? So were they very, very clearly defined, or is there a sort of blurring of the lines between? And as Councillor Chalcott said, with 2% being your sort of central basis, we've seen interest rates far, far higher than that, and it feels like high could be 3% or way beyond. And I'm just concerned about what that means for us as a council.
Christophe.
So let me start with inflation. We know that the former government had a target to get inflation to around 2%. So we set that as the central scenario. Not say if inflation changes, that provision needs to change with it as we move towards. Now we know that September was 1.7%. we're going to be keeping an eye on this. We've had unprecedented levels of inflation. We've also had significant number of years where inflation was very, very low. So I'll be tracking it, and I'll be making the call as we get nearer the February budget to make the appropriate provision that we will need. I'm also tracking it from the perspective of the contracts that we have that are coming in, so that we understand exactly what the contractual terms are that we're signing up to, or indeed what already exists. So these are the additional provisions of the known contracts within the medium-term financial plan. The prudent view on our ability to contain and reduce demand pressures. I've said this because you can see within the in-year position that we've got just under £5.5 million forecast overspend within service directorates. And I've said that I can see that we've got significant challenges and pressures. If every service that has a pressure, whether they've got a forecast overspend or not, is doing everything that they can to mitigate that pressure, we will see less of them coming through into fruition. That 5.9 million is an assessment of our ability to contain those pressures. As it stands at this point in the year, that 5.9 million correlates roughly with where services are, but that will fluctuate even further. We will see services pulling back their forecast overspends, I hope on an ongoing basis, so the provision is not required next year to its full amount. And we may see services where certain pressures come through right at the end of the year, and we only see a small amount of it in the forecast, but actually the full year effect means that it will continue and we don't have the time to manage it back. However, there is an expectation that we do everything that we can to spend within the budget that's allocated. My provision here is an assessment at a point in time, and I will continue to do that. It won't be a general provision that is held in February. This general provision will effectively come away, and the actual provisions that we would need to make, that members would be agreeing to as part of the February budget, will be the individual items where we see the individual pressures. Right now, this is just a provision, an overarching provision that would need to be broken down if indeed it stays at this number.
Okay, thank you. I might have to watch your answer back again, I think, and kind of re-listen again, if you see what I mean, because there's so much to take in, and often we're asking questions and some of the answers are quite complex, and they're necessarily complex. So I may watch that again and sort of, you know, make sure I haven't missed anything. In page 26, on table 6, there's an analysis of savings themes, and you've got all the different, you know, efficiency savings, service levels, etc. And we haven't heard a great deal about devolution of assets lately. And I wondered where that fitted into that table. It could fit in several places, I suppose. But also there was quite a lot of talk about different assets that were going to be devolved, or things that were going to be stopped, services that were going to be stopped that haven't been, such as the dimmer dump and things like that, as people call it locally. And I just wondered, how are we on track for those savings, and where do they fit in this table, please?
So you will need to wait for the budget options proposals as they come through to the executive and through to scrutiny as well, where the detail of the savings proposals will be listed there. And then within those meetings, you'll be able to ask all the questions. You'll also see our progress towards our ability to set a balanced budget.
Thank you. Can I ask one quick query? In terms of the pay inflation figures that are built into the forecast, what complement of staff are they based on? Because obviously there was the level of staffing that we had at the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the year, that may be very different. So what's that figure based on?
So it's 2% of our existing staff base as the budget was set in February. So those numbers I've not changed at all. So it may end up being slightly higher percentage if our workforce is a slightly smaller workforce.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from members? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much for the report. Obviously, as you've said, we need to keep an eye on where we're going in terms of there are so many variables that are in there at the moment, and all of them can move in various different directions. So it's going to be you've got an interesting job to keep on top of. So thank you for that. I think Councillor Lyshaw made a comment following on from one of the two other comments about the reserves, as to whether there is maybe a way next time that there can be a little bit more of a breakdown as to how those reserves are actually built up. So if that's feasible, that would be really useful. I think it gets members to understand the background to those reserves a little bit better.
So within the statement of accounts when published, the breakdown of the earmark reserves is included there, and we will endeavour to, there will always be a breakdown of the earmark reserves within the budget report in February, and of course out, so that you have that information available. So those are the intervals where you will see the detail regarding reserves.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we will be looking forward to that in about a quarter's time. I guess it will be coming through, so thank you. If there's no further comments, members are happy that we note the report, and obviously the questions are taken on board that have been raised by members. Okay, thank you very much. That moves us on to agenda item 8, improvement and transformation programme, which is fairly apt following on from the last comments. And if I can ask Louise Ratley, if you'd like to introduce this one, please.
Thanks, Chair. Louise Routley, Improvement Transformation Lead. Dawn Bettridge is online as well today, so she's supporting from some other location. So the report that's presented to you today is the update on the Improvement Transformation Programme, and it covers the months from September to mid-October. The report includes a dashboard and details of progress of the 5 component parts over the month. It also includes a programme risk report it also includes a programme risk report, and also within the document includes an update in terms of what activities taken place since July, which is when we last came with the programme update. That's on pages 35 to 36, just highlights what has actually taken place since we last came along. And there's also an update to the risk report, which includes an additional 4 risks in relation to devolution, and that's regarding devolution of assets and services from the organisation to city, town and parish councils, and those predominantly relate to resource and the ability to deliver desired outcomes of the devolution programme. Also, there's two of the risks regarding workforce programme. They have increased from an amber risk, which is a medium risk, to a high level risk due to progressing the council restructure. And today we've asking Scrutiny to for Scrutiny's views and a sort on the approach and progress that is currently being taken in regard to the monthly programme update that you've received. Dawn, I don't know if you wanted to add anything further to what I've said before we go to questions. Oh, okay.
No. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from members? Okay, Councillor Rodriguez, then Councillor Terminal.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose looking through this, looking at the red risks, the common theme I think that comes through really is about people, whether it's a lack of redundancies, a lack of workforce, a lack of skills and expertise to deliver stuff, etc., motivation as well I see in there. And to me, it just looks like a really complicated position to be in at the moment. And you know, for me reading this, what I feel is I really value the people that we have, the expertise that we have. And clearly there's a really big struggle in this. That really worries me, and particularly when I look at the voluntary redundancy scheme, where it's off track at the minute, I wonder really if we can get a bit more of an update on that. And what I wanted to understand, looking at the tables, is where you have the target score section, just to explain what that means, because for me, a target score would be 0 on all of them, obviously. But what do you actually mean by target score? Is that what you expect to achieve, like realistically?
Who wants to take that? Do you want to take it in the room or take it online?
Through you, Chair. If it's okay, I'll come in and support Lou with some of the questions, particularly on the workforce. In terms of the risks, yeah, I absolutely agree. They're very people focused and workforce focused, and they're fairly self-explanatory. Just to provide some reassurance on the voluntary redundancy scheme, which has now completed, although when we wrote this paper, it was shown as off track, that was because there was less than 5 members of staff where, due to contractual issues, we were unable to complete their voluntary redundancy application. They have now all been dealt with, sometimes outside of the VR scheme. So the VR programme is not off track, and we have completed it and delivered the savings as previously reported. In terms of target score on risk, we are just trying to be realistic that no matter what we do to mitigate some of the risks that are against the workforce programme, there will always be a residual risk. So you're quite right to say it's a very complex and challenging environment that our workforce is having to sort of work within at the moment, if that makes sense. We do have significant recruitment and retention issues in a number of services across the council, and we are going through, as all members will be aware, a very significant period of consultation. Now we're within a 40-day formal consultation period with trade unions and staff regarding a number of potential compulsory redundancies. And there are a number of staff who are currently at risk of redundancy or propose to be at risk, or proposed to be within a ring fence where there are more people than posts available. That consultation period isn't going to finish until the 7th of December, so it continues to be an uncertain time for our staff. And at the same time, we're clearly wanting to keep the show on the road regarding our service levels as they currently are. We are running with quite a lot of vacancies. We are supported by a number of agency workers across the organisation to make sure that we can maintain service levels during this time, but we are minimising external recruitment to absolutely essential roles only to ensure that we are looking for alternative suitable employment for those staff that may find themselves at risk of redundancy in the new year. So hopefully that just adds a little bit of flavour to the report, and happy to take any further questions regarding the workforce programme.
Just before I come back to Councillor Rodriguez, Ms. Ratley, you were going to come in as well.
I was, I forgot to put my microphone on, so apologies. Dawn has answered it in terms of the target score, so thank you.
Councillor Rodriguez.
And so another thing for me on workforce then, obviously lots of well, potentially compulsory redundancies coming in the coming months. We hear as councillors over and over again that various directorates or areas are understaffed, not able to deliver various things because of limited staff resources. This may be really simplistic of me to think, but is it not possible in any way, shape or form to kind of retrain where we have excessive number of staff, because clearly if we're making them redundant, they're excessive, and move them into areas where we have gaps? Is there any of that being done at the moment?
Ms. Bettridge.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. We're not currently focusing on retraining people because of the scale and the pace of the restructuring programme that we're having to deliver. We are looking at reducing the pay bill in the region of £37 million by the end of March. And therefore it is a complex but fast-paced and ambitious programme of change. What we will be doing, however, in the new year, when we finish consultation, we will be reviewing the consultation feedback, and as a result of that feedback, there will no doubt be some changes that will be made to structures, and that will impact on individuals. By around about the beginning of February, individuals that are still at risk
of redundancy will have sort of first access to all vacant posts and any posts that are currently filled temporarily by agency workers. So what we'll be doing is we're working very closely with at-risk employees, both to support them over the next few months during the consultation period, but also to do our very best to try and mitigate against the need for compulsory redundancies by enabling people to apply for vacant posts and new posts that we have in the new structure. We're running a lot of roadshows and workshops over the next few months to support staff for planning for their future. So they now already know if they're in a ring fence or at risk of redundancy. And there is numerous supporting activity that we are putting on for colleagues so they can start thinking about if they do want to apply for a different role that may be vacant, that may be suitable for them against their skills and abilities. Then there is a lot of opportunity over the next few months for them to attend those roadshows or to partake in the relevant training or the webinars that will help them when it does come to applying for those roles.
Thank you. Ms. Rowley, do you want to come in at all? Are you happy? Okay. Can I just ask one follow-up question in relation to the risks? Because obviously the risk register is something that we're all keen to see is being addressed. And I'm just trying to get my head around how it works. So in effect, we've got what's described as inherent score is where we started from. We've then got actions which we then carry out to reduce those risks, and we get to the target one, which is at the end. Where I'm a little confused is some of the later risks. We have 0% actions have taken place, and yet the score on the risk has already dropped. And I don't quite understand how we're reducing risk when we haven't actually taken any action yet to reduce it. So that, for example, on page, where is it, 17, which is page 54, I think it is, but it's got 17 at the bottom of the page. So that's the ITP 0013 devolution programme. But it's the same. If you look at a number of ones later on, there are no actions taken, but the risk score has already dropped. Ms. Routley, you've got that one.
Thanks, Chair. So they've only just come on to the risk register of the devolution risk. So the existing controls is the mitigating activity that they've already done, and then the actions why it's 0% is because they've only just come on to the risk register. So they've got the actions are there, the mitigating actions, which should drive down the current, it should then enable the target score of the risk. What they're saying is those actions at the moment would still, even doing the actions, would still mean that the current score is still within the high level threshold of that risk score, being from 25 to 20. That's at ITP 013.
Okay, so in effect, although it's showing a 0%, they have done some actions already before it's gone on the risk register.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I've got Councillor Trimnell, then Councillor Sowton. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. So Councillor Rodriguez has covered a fair bit of what I wanted to say, which was my concerns over the staffing, about the morale, about the workload, and about the fact that we're losing skilled staff and not able to replace that. And that is then obviously having an ongoing effect on how we're able to complete this transformation. But what I will talk about more is that it seems that the redundancies are off track and unaffordable because we haven't got the money, and yet it also says, possibly still on page 51, that there's a confidence that we will be able to, the money we're getting from the capitalisation will exceed the cost of the redundancies. And so I'm wondering, is this a case of we're waiting to be able to use that money to be able to offset those? Because I notice that it says on page 51 that the capitalisation directive is only approved in principle, which is ongoing now for an awful long time, and I would imagine would be a cause of some stress at this point that you haven't heard anything. It's a new government. Is that going to be kept to? It just, I was trying to tie it all together and I couldn't, so I wonder if somebody could please.
I think Miss Christopher, you've gone on screen.
I've come on screen. I think this is one for me. So I'll start with your latter question. I'll move to the first one in a moment. So your latter question about have we heard anything? Not yet. We're still waiting to hear from MHCLG. I am in dialogue with them, so I am awaiting the outcome. We will wait and see. I have heard nothing to the contrary at the moment, and we are banking on the capitalisation coming in, as government know and are briefed already about. In terms of the redundancies, there are two ways that we can foreseeably manage the cost of redundancies. One is through the exceptional financial support and capitalisation. However, there is a mid-year Treasury management update that is making its way through the system at the moment and will need to go to council as well, that highlights the that we'll look at our in-year position and updating our Treasury, our flexibilities in capital piece, so that we will be looking to see what we can do. We already have a flexibilities in capital strategy in the public domain. I will be reviewing it as part of this piece of work, so that whether the additional capitalisation directive is there and the facilities there or not, there are some items that we can, under the flexibilities in capital strategy, indeed fund using capital receipts.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. I just think the concern is, obviously we've got members of staff, and I know Christmas is Christmas, but this is such a time of a sort of a financial burden on families and things, and so that waiting game and not knowing is really difficult, and that's just a huge concern for me. And I know it would be awful at any time of year, but it always feels particularly bad when it's the darkest time of year and the coldest and most miserable, and you also face the fear that you're going to have no money very shortly, and so that's my concern. It's not a question, but just a sort of an additional point.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair, I would like to understand the relationship really between permanent employees and contractors when we're talking about saving money and how that has been looked at. I know that some skills are necessary and may have been ring fenced, and I know we have a problem in planning, but I would just really like to understand from a permanent employees or the point of view of permanent employees as regards contractors, how that balance has been worked out and how that is developing. Thank you.
Ms. Bettridge, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a good question. In the business case that we've published on our SharePoint site, members will have access to that. We have listed for transparency all of our existing agency interims, contractors, whatever you'd like to call those important people that are helping us with our contingent labour force at the moment. We have 263 posts covered by agency workers currently. That obviously does change. They are covering primarily vacant posts in the current establishment where we've been unable to recruit or retain staff, or alternatively where we feel that these will be essential posts for suitable alternative employment for at-risk staff in the new year. So that's why we're carrying quite a lot of agency workers. They are out of scope of the service restructure. They're not employees of the council, so they have no automatic right to any of the vacant posts within the structure. At the end of March 2025, when the whole process is completed, if we still have outstanding vacancies, then obviously any of our agency workers, if they wish to apply for those when they are advertised externally, if they're advertised externally, will be able to apply at that point. I hope that helps answer the question. It's
yes, that has. But I just would like to come back with one of it. Is that has there any work been done on feasibility study with transferable skills to move this forward to those, as you said, some of those vacant posts are covered by agency workers, but has there been a skills matrix or a survey of transferable skills done within that area?
There may have been some done on a local basis, so within individual directorates and services, service directors and heads of service will be aware of the skills and the people within their team, but we haven't had, the honest answer is we haven't had the time to do a widespread council workforce skills audit as part of the scope of this programme. And the reason for this is that we are dealing with nearly 5,000 individuals from 5 former councils into one. It would take a lot of time to do that, to be able to, for corporately us to try and match people to those vacancies. So what we are doing is that we will be displaying all vacant posts on the SharePoint site with the job descriptions that are a requirement for people, you know, to look at, see whether they meet the essential or desirable criteria of those roles, and therefore staff can, if they are at risk, they can view those vacant posts, those job descriptions, and determine themselves whether they feel that that might be an opportunity for them to stay in our employment. We will be, and this won't happen till about middle of January, end of February, you know, sort of early February next year, once we've completed the finalisation of the consultation and the structures, then people will be able to put in an expression of interest and apply for those roles. And as I said earlier, the priority for that exercise goes to those staff that are at risk at that point in time. If they are still vacant after that exercise, then they'll be more widely available in terms of wider recruitment. So rather than trying to slow the process down of the restructuring by doing a skills audit, we want to empower our staff with all the information, with support, with training and guidance, and the roadshows that we're doing, the HR drop-in sessions that we're doing, the webinars that we're doing, and empower individuals to make some choices themselves about the roles that they think that they have the skills and knowledge and ability to be considered for in the new year.
I've got Councillor Chilcott and then Councillor Locke. So Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much. I am assuming that this risk register will come to audit, because I think it's on audit for every meeting, so I'm sure we'll see it again there, because I think there's much to be debated. So a couple of questions really that jumped out at me from the paper today. So if we look at page 54 and ITP 0005, which is unmotivated workforce, so the risk there is at 25, the inherent score, which is the most that it could possibly be. And yet you've got the current score at 15. So if I look at the consequences, a drop in morale, potential increase in retention, potential reduced responsiveness to customer needs, reputational damage and higher sickness absence, I would say most of those consequences we are experiencing. But there's a couple of things I don't know and understand. The first one is, has our sickness absence risen? And if we look on the mitigating controls, it says there's a survey to bench staff wellbeing. So has the survey been done, and how is the wellbeing of our staff? That's the first question, please.
I'll come back on that one through you, Chair. Yes, thank you for that question. What I would say is that when this last risk assessment was done, it's dated as at the 4th of October. The consultation period with staff went live on the 24th of October. I think it's fair to say, as Maria has said, this environment that we're working with is constantly shifting, almost day by day, week by week. So the survey that we did 3 months ago to look at how engaged our staff were, if I was to run it today, I would guarantee I'd get a different result, because clearly people are now, it's very, very real. They know exactly how, you know, they're being affected, and therefore that is naturally going to be a period where morale in the workforce is going to be very, very low for the 700 odd people that find themselves either in ring fences or at risk at the moment, that are going to have to go through individual consultation whilst we speak to the trade unions over the next few months as well. So we are monitoring our sickness absence. We produce and share with members, and it's published internally, all of our workforce profile information on a monthly basis. We do have a concern with the number of long-term sickness cases that we have, and we're still working very closely with those managers that have staff that are suffering from a variety of illnesses that are meaning that they're needing to take, you know, an extended long-term period away from work. At this time of year, we also get a rise in sickness absence because of the time of year, lots of cold, flu, and I'm sure that the environment that people are working in with pressures outside of work as well as pressures inside of work will naturally, you'll see a raise in short-term sickness over the next couple of months. I think where possible, from my experience, staff are really trying to, you know, to keep themselves well. You know, we haven't suddenly had a big significant change in the pattern of sickness absence that we'd expect at this time of year. And I'm sure some of that is because obviously of the genuine concern that employees have about their future job security, which we're very, very, you know, aware of, and managers are still supporting staff on a one-to-one basis, as you'd expect us to be with our colleagues.
Thank you. I think everyone will join in agreeing we're absolutely feeling for our staff at the moment. I think that goes without saying. My reason for question was that the current score you've got at 15, and I just couldn't see sufficient existing controls, given the environment we're in currently, for it to be a 15, i.e. move down 10 from 25 to 15. And especially there was one there, I think at 10%, which is total reward offers incentives to remind staff of the benefits of working for Somerset Council. For me, studying risk as I do, the mitigations and where we're at perhaps were a bit too generous. I think we're nearer the 25 than perhaps this report reflects. The second one,
before you carry on, Councillor Chilcott, Ms. Routley was going to come in on that point.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to remind people of the process that we go through for the risk reporting. So the that risk that we've just been discussing isn't due for review. It's due for review every other month. So and the fact that it wasn't due on the 4th of October when we run the report. So it will be due for the next report. So Dawn would then and her team would be looking to review that risk and may potentially increase the current score. But it's just to remind people of, it's further up in the report of our review cycle. Those high level risks are reviewed monthly, medium risks are reviewed bi-monthly, so every other month, and then low level risks are reviewed on a quarterly basis. I'll hand over. I think Dawn was going to just come in. I don't know. No, okay.
That's okay. I'll take on board the feedback, and we will keep reviewing these risk scores. So as I said, I think they get out of sync with what we're experiencing and feeling and going through with our staff at the moment. It will feel disjointed in terms of the timing of these reports and what's actually happening now. But I totally take on back your concern about the relevance of the mitigations and whether or not that we, you know, have we covered enough in there. I know we're doing a huge amount, so I'll take that away and make sure that the mitigations the next time you see these risks really fully reflect the work that is going on to mitigate the impact on our colleagues at the moment. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chilcott.
thank you. I think this is a really fast-moving project. We know and understand that. I am concerned that some of them are looked at bi-monthly. That doesn't feel very often, especially when they're in front of us and in the public domain. Perhaps within it somewhere you need to put when it was last reviewed, or because it says in the report current score, but it's not that current if it was 2 months ago. So there might be something around that you can look to do to give us a bit more information. It's really difficult looking at something if it's a couple of months out of date. The next one was just the next item, which is ITP 006, which is council struggles to recruit and retain required talent and knowledge. I think this is something we all recognise, and again it was at a 16, but when I look at the existing controls and the current score, it hasn't moved at all. And when I look at the target score, it wants it to go from a 16 to an 8. So that just was a concern for me, that it's quite high, there's no movement, and the target score is way below. So that would be one I would probably be looking for some more information on.
Ms. Routley, is that you or is that Ms. Bettridge? Okay, Ms. Bettridge, over to you.
Sorry, I was just trying to find it in the report there.
Page 50,
yeah, I've got it,
55.
55, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, the council struggles to recruit and retain required talent and knowledge. I think that even with the mitigations in place right now that have been listed, it's understandable that they haven't brought that down at the moment. It's actually, as you'd imagine, a difficult time for us to be attracting the best talent to Somerset Council. They've only got to put on the news or Google our organisation, and I'm sure that that would give them some concern about giving up a permanent job and coming to us at this time. So it remains a very big challenge. Plus, we've got the national picture of shortages across some very skilled professional areas where we're having to compete against the national market. And we also know that we're having to offer market supplements to attract the very best people to come here, and also to retain our skilled professional workers as well that are being headhunted, shall we say, for other local councils at higher rates of pay. So we are working very hard to mitigate that, but it's a bit of a sieve. As fast as we bring people in, we can lose people as well. So we're constantly running with very high vacancies across the organisation. That some of the controls and mitigations that are listed there against that item, they are what they are, and I think, you know, I've probably covered those hopefully in what I've just said. In terms of how we bring that down to target, I think we've got a very, very difficult time ahead of us in the next 6 to 12 months with recruitment and retention. What I would say, though, on the flip side, is because we have high turnover, because it is difficult to attract people, because we do have a high number of vacancies, on the flip side, that is going to be a benefit for the staff at risk of redundancy, because there will be more job opportunities for them had we been in a much more buoyant job market, shall I say. So although the risk is really strong, what we should be able to do is do our very best to retain many staff with, you know, huge sort of service skills and experience that would otherwise be made compulsory redundant next year. There will be quite a large number of vacant posts and new posts that they will be able to consider applying for, rather than us having to pay out unnecessarily on compulsory redundancy payments. And then by the end of March, we'll know exactly what our vacant positions are, and what we'll be able to go out to the market and how to attract for those remaining posts that are still there from the 1st of April next year.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the comments. I suppose for me, this needs to be as meaningful as it can be, and I don't think you can, in all reality, get to an 8. So my question is that a realistic target score, given we are in the near future going to be struggling for a little while to recruit and retain? So again, if it's not achievable and the mitigations aren't doing it, you know, perhaps that target score could do with having a look at. Thank you.
I think Councillor Lyshaw was going to comment on that, if she can, just behind you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point that I find it really interesting to look at both likelihood and impact, and actually how they each move. So sometimes the impact stays exactly the same, as in 006, but the likelihood reduces, and you would hope that it would reduce as we go through the next year, say. I completely accept that this doesn't give a target of when we might hope to get to that target score, but I do find this document much easier to read now that it's generated from IdeaGen. I think there are lots of other things that we could include in here about how often a risk is updated. I'm just really concerned that we don't then end up with a document that is so complex. People go back to finding it harder to understand. So I think it is an improved document, definitely. I'm sure audit will have more to say on it, because I'd be really surprised and disappointed if audit didn't have more to say. But I think we do always need to look at likelihood and impact differently and not just look at the score. Thank you.
Okay. I've now got Councillor Locke and then Councillor Soughton. Councillor Locke.
Yeah, I'll be reasonably quick. I'm a bit disappointed with some of the wording and the comments that I heard from the officer, but I mean, that's the way it is. And but I'm concerned because, and my main concern is the ability of this authority and councillors to be able to deliver services, which we know have to be met by cutbacks with the financial situation. But I'm very disappointed after working for a big company in Somerset for many years, where they've did redundancies, had redundancies, and seen how they worked. And I wasn't affected by it, but I do know how it does affect people. But I'm a bit disappointed that we didn't have time to do the skills audit of the people, because I feel that maybe our residents out there who we all represent, irrespective of what party we belong to at this moment in time, would see that we are trying to carry on delivering, and we can tell them who they may need to get in touch with. And don't. But at this moment in time, we can't, and I feel we have really missed it there. And I do have concern moving forward with how long it's going to take to build the confidence of the residents of Somerset back up that we are capable of delivering services which they sometimes expect us to deliver, which is pie in the sky. But I mean, the majority of the time we try to do what we can to deliver. And I think a lot of these shortfalls at this moment in time could have been mitigated against and backfilled by some of these people who are going. And I'm sorry, we've missed a real trick there. And I don't like some of the language that I've heard spoken about it. You know, the show, it's what it is, and everything else. That's the, you know, I feel a bit disappointed with that. But I appreciate cutbacks have to be made and everything, but there's a way of doing things. I'm sorry, I'm probably waffling a little bit, but that's how I feel. And I'm no employment expert, but I know there is one sat next to me who knows a darn sight more than I do, being a convener in a very, very large company. So thank
I think part of the concern obviously members have, I think, is that, as you said, we understand the time pressures and that obviously the skills audit takes time, but the difficulty is if we don't do the audit of the skills and the roles that we're filling, how do we know that the roles we're getting rid of are the right roles that we've got rid of in some respects? So in the report, I think in one section there's a comment about property rationalisation is amber now because a new project coordinator has had to be introduced because somebody else has left. So it's just that question of, does that by not doing the skills audit up front and knowing what those skills were and what those roles were, has that left us open to potentially losing staff and roles that might have been better not lost? Ms. Bettridge.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, you know, I totally hear what the councillor was saying regarding the skills audit, and I think all of us, all officers that have been leading on this programme, if we'd have had more time, there's lots of things that maybe we would have liked to have done differently. But in a financial emergency, we've had to make sure that we keep the council safe and that we do the very best thing that we can by our staff in the time and the circumstances which have been, you know, which we are having to face. So what I would say is that sometimes when you do skills audits at a time when you're just about to make a lot of people redundant, there will be a perception that that skills information will somehow become part of the selection for redundancy. So staff don't necessarily welcome that exercise as an exercise that is a positive exercise that will lead to a lot of opportunity for them to be developed and have skills and career development as a result of that skills audit. As we go into next year and we rebuild the council that we want to be, our focus on learning and development, skills, knowledge, talent, workforce planning is going to be right at the top of our people strategy and our agenda. It hasn't been able to have been a priority in this programme, where we've had to push very, very hard to restructure the council within a financial envelope that we can afford. What we will do though, and as I said before, it's really important that we do recognise that the current process that we're in and the current process that we're consulting staff over is about minimising compulsory redundancies. We're not in a process of where we're just trying to put people into lots of different roles. We have to select people in a meaningful way, going through meaningful consultation for redundancy. So the opportunity will come once we've completed consultation, we've finalised the structures and we finalised the vacant roles that are still available. That's when we will work really closely with our staff who are at risk to try and find suitable alternative employment to mitigate the need for compulsory redundancy. That's what this programme is about. This programme has not been about looking at the skills of the whole workforce to redeploy everybody to play to their skill set. It's been about identifying the 4,000 plus people that we've been able to slot in roles that exist in the future in the new establishment, in the new staffing structures, and then support the remaining staff, of which we have over 700 affected at the moment, to secure employment. The skills and the development and how we help them match to jobs will happen, and we're running a supporting people through change work stream that's been running now for over 2 months with partners all across Somerset in terms of our response to redundancy, to support colleagues during this period to do everything we can to secure them with appropriate employment next year. So although we haven't done a traditional skills audit, I would, arguably if we had have done that, we would not deliver our pay bill savings by the end of March. It would have had to have put a considerable amount of time into the programme, and arguably it would not necessarily have mitigated the redundancies that we're going to see at the end. So I think there are two different sort of programmes that we're talking about. There's the redundancy, the restructuring programme, and then there will be a significant workforce development programme that will happen next year. But I do understand the frustration and the disappointment, and I also recognise the fact that there's things that we would like to do if we'd have had more than 9 months to deliver it. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sowton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a question, but I'd like to say something first and foremost, and Councillor Locke touched on it slightly. Redundancies are incredibly destructive to organisations for the period of time that they're going on. Some years ago, the then government changed consultation period for anything over 110 staff to 45 days from 90 days. That at the time, from my background, wasn't considered a good idea, and actually it's proven not to have been a good idea, because you're trying to do something for a lot of people that's immensely complex in 45 days. That's not good to find out this, that, and everything else about how you're going to conduct that redundancy, how you're going to do this, what selection criteria you're going to do. Are there unions to consult with? Are there more than one union to consult with? Things like that. So they're very, very destructive to productivity, morale, and that goes on for a very long time. I've had a lot of experience of this as a trade union convener and dealing with redundancies, and I've seen the damage that they do. I'll say no more on that. I've just got one or a couple of questions really I'd like to ask. Obviously, we have a 45-day consultation period, and we're so many days into that. I forget how many days, but we're a few days into that. When are the first predicted compulsory redundancies? And are staff then expected to work their notice period, whatever that is? That's my question. Thank you.
Ms. Bettridge.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I would also refer members to a presentation that we did for all members last week. So there are some slides on the members' shared area that will give you quite a lot of background as well to the timeline, the background to the consultation process, who we're consulting, and how the programme is being managed. So in terms of the timelines, though, to answer the question, the 45-day consultation period closes on the 7th of December 2024. Then between the 9th of December to the 10th of January, we'll be reviewing all the consultation feedback that we've received. And we will need to then finalise the structures, having made any changes as a result of consultation feedback that we agree we need to take on board. In terms of individual notice of redundancies, the earliest that they are likely to be issued will be the beginning of February, so around the 3rd of February. The appointments process for ring-fenced roles and vacant roles will start from the middle of January, around the 13th, and will continue to at least the 28th of February. The new establishment, the budget and the new structures will go live on the 1st of April in 2025. In terms of notice periods, there will be a decision that will need to be made. That decision is going to go to ELT, and we'll need to discuss this with the senior management team regarding pay in lieu of notice. So whether or not that we will be asking staff to work their whole notice period, or whether we will be paying pay in lieu of notice for anybody that has a notice period that extends beyond the end of March 2025. And that is something that the executive leadership team are considering at the moment. We need to cost model that and understand what the size of that cost might look like.
Thank you, Chair. So my point is really that this can go on now for another 6 months. And we have to think about the staff, and we have to think about how we make that process is well, not painless, but as bearable as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly going on to, just go back quickly onto the staff side of things. So I do think there was a missed opportunity there to do things a bit differently, perhaps a bit more holistically as well, I think. And I'm just going to give you, I've been simplistic, I'm going to be simplistic again. So I run businesses, and to take you back to my business, I run a restaurant. And this has happened in the past, so I'll use this as an example. If I've got a waiter in front of house who I feel like actually we don't need that waiter anymore, I'm wasting money employing him or her. However, the kitchen really needs an extra member of staff as a cook. I would have gone to that person, which I did, and said, look, mate, X, Y, Z, need you in the kitchen. You'd be great there. You've got the fantastic skills to do this job. Will you move over? Yes, thank you very much. So without having to go through a difficult process, I was able to move someone from front of house to back of house and still keep a very happy team around me. Now, that's really simple, small business, I know, but I feel like a lot of that really could have been done potentially on this on wider scale as Somerset Council. So I think it's a lost opportunity that we didn't do skills. However, I appreciate that the work that the officers are doing is really challenging, and I appreciate all the work that they are doing. I think that the message perhaps needs to be sent to, I would argue, the lead member, who I would say, gives a direction as to where we're going, and that there was that missed opportunity there, and perhaps what learnings can he have from that to do things differently in the future as well.
Councillor Lashon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, if I may, that back in February of this year, when I introduced the budget setting papers, I did make it really clear that it was a budget to avoid a Section 114 notice, and that it is really, really clear that that includes those one-off monies, capitalisation directive, which we intend to fund by sale of assets rather than additional borrowing, regardless of what the new government has said about taking off that premium on the PWLB rate, which nobody can tell me yet whether that's retrospective or just for future borrowing. But because we only had that 1 year with adequate one-off monies of reserves and capitalisation directive, we have worked at a really significant pace, because I heard Sarah Dyke, who's now MP, having resigned as a councillor, as you know, say that she worked at Wiltshire when Wiltshire Council underwent local government reorganisation, and that she saw what she called wave after wave of redundancies. So the work done at I won't say a leisurely pace, because none of this work is leisurely, and we all know how much it impacts people's lives and their families. But because we went through LGR at a time of much greater inflation than we've seen for actually decades, and because interest rates went up at kind of not in tandem, but very soon after the inflation rate went up, we've been pushed into a concentrated timescale. The only thing I would say as a mitigation is that I did actually welcome that there was informal consultation before the formal consultation opened on the compulsory redundancies. And I just wanted to make the point, Chair, too, that the blueprints were put forward by the service directors in each directorate. So they were put forward by people who knew what services were delivered, what posts there were, what posts needed to remain, and how they felt as experienced senior managers and leaders in their directorate, so that they were done in an informed way, that it was not top down. Everything in a hierarchy has some element of top down, I do understand that, but I feel that officers have worked the very best they could to make this a better process than it might have been, and almost certainly would have been in a commercial environment. I think public sector is very different than a commercial environment. I live in a small place, a small town, actually a parish, where when people are made redundant, they sometimes go into work in the morning, they have a meeting at 10 o'clock and they're escorted off the premises by lunchtime. We don't work like that in public sector, and I'm jolly glad we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bettridge, was there anything you wanted to add, or? No.
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I've got Councillor Chilcott, and then I think we'll probably look to wind up.
Very last question. It's the first time I've come across it today, pay in lieu of notice. How's that going to impact the budget, please? Because I thought everything was meant to start savings wise from the beginning of the new year. If you're getting into the realms of pay in lieu of notice, then that's going to impact. And sorry to bring back money when it's people and roles and jobs, but that will impact on services we can deliver next year.
Councillor Lashon's indicated she's going to respond.
If I may, Chair, I just want to make the point that some elements of redundancy payments are able to be paid by capitalisation, so sale of assets, and some are not. think I'm right in saying that what's generally called pylon pay in lieu of notice is not able to be paid by capitalisation, and so we have to take that into account. Absolutely. I know Maria Christofi has actually had to move on to a meeting with the external auditors now, but I have had conversations with her and heard her talk about where other things in council's expenditure are able to be capitalised, and so she is looking to get that balance right between what can be capitalised and what can't, so that we absolutely stay on the right side of the law with regard to redundancies.
Ms. Bettridge, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just to come in on pay in lieu of notice, what this actually covers is the staff, if they are made redundant or they're dismissed on the grounds of redundancy, the employer has to pay them their contractual notice period. Now, we have a choice of whether we ask the staff to work that contractual notice period and it's paid, or they leave earlier, and we therefore, so we don't breach our contract terms, we pay them in lieu of their notice. So there's no additional cost to the council, it's just when we pay the money. Now, obviously, when people are made compulsory redundant in these difficult circumstances, for some individuals, they may want to, be freed up as soon as possible to enable them to look for work outside of the council. But this isn't a decision that has been made yet. It's something that we will need to have further conversation around, and as I say, this is currently with the Chief Executive and the Executive Leadership Team and with Maria for consideration. The provision for the costs of coming out of the budget in 24-25, because members will be aware that the Workforce Savings Programme was to achieve a full year saving from the 1st of April 2025 for 25-26 budget. So the savings we're making in this year will give us a full year saving next year. If we don't do pay in lieu of notice and some people are leaving, very close to March or beyond, that will impact into some of our savings next year. So there's just really a commercial decision that's got to be made in balance with doing the right thing by our staff, understanding it's a disruptive time, but also being very cognizant on our aim, which is to deliver full year savings from this programme from the 1st of April. So if Maria was on the call, I'm sure she would explain how those provisions financially are being provided for, but it doesn't increase the cost to the council. We're going to have to pay this cost as part of the redundancy programme for anybody that leaves the organisation, because they're contractually entitled to their notice periods. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions around the room, so thank you very much for the presentation, for taking the questions. Obviously, if you can take on board the issues that have been raised by members, I think obviously a number of members have raised their concerns about the impacts, obviously, on our staff and the way that they are inevitably going to be impacted by this whole process, but also the impact that it has also on the members of the public and the services that we're ultimately here to provide them. So obviously that's something we need to watch. I think the issue came about closely monitoring and reviewing the risks in sort of as real time as we possibly can, because obviously, as everyone has said, this is a fast moving situation, so our response to it needs to be similar, and again looking at those mitigations that can be put in place to help us as much as we can with the whole process. But as I say, thank you for your presentation to us today, and we'll keep a close eye working with you moving forward. Okay, members, that brings us to the end of that item, which takes us on to the end of the meeting, I think. So thank you all very much for your attendance this afternoon, and we will close the meeting at, where are we, just after 15:15. Thank you.